Hi, welcome to today's demonstration. What we're going to do is we're going to develop a mind map. We're going to take an orange. I have an extra orange here so that we can dismantle the orange, and we're going to use the orange as a starting point to develop our mind map. To begin your mind map, start with a word, or maybe even start with a picture. Once we've defined the starting point, which in this case is the orange, the next thing that we need to do is we need to begin to develop areas that relate to the orange. This is a little bit like a spider diagram. It's very helpful at this point to begin a conversation with the people that are helping to develop the mind map. We began a conversation by describing the object that we chose, which in our case was an orange. We described the orange as being juicy, sweet, and little. For our mind map, we have 4 distinct areas that we want to develop. The first area we identified was colour. The next area related to the orange's shape. Our object has a very distinct shape. It's a sphere. Try to visualize your mind map as often as you can. In other words, try to make drawings as well as writing words. You could even decide to use different textures. Or, in our case here, we began to dissect and dismantle one of the oranges to break it down into its components. As we broke our object down, other ideas began to come to mind. We identified that the orange has skin, or some people might call it orange peel. We also discovered that our object could be broken into segments. A mind map is like exercise for the brain. You can pick any starting point. It doesn't even have to be an object. So if you pick something that doesn't break down like ours, that's not a problem. An interesting thing that we discovered was that our object is typically a sphere, but it also breaks down into multiple parts. So we continued the process of simply describing. I read in a book recently that the inspiration for the Sydney Opera House came from an orange. The architect, who was struggling to find ideas for his design, was sitting outside and he was peeling an orange for lunch. And when he looked at the segments, he thought it was very interesting that a sphere could be broken down into segments. So he began to use this idea to develop a design for the Sydney Opera House. And as you can see, they're like giant, big pieces of orange. It's perfectly normal and natural for different areas that you're developing to become connected in some way. I mean, think about it. The object that we're starting with is an orange, and all of the areas that we're developing relate back to the orange. We chose to use a red marker to define our link, between the two areas. But you could use anything. You could use a piece of string. It's nice to try and decorate your mind map and think about how you're decorating it. For instance, David here is colouring the orange in orange, which is a very sensible thing to do, but it's going to help us for the next part of our mind map. Very good, David. Well done. Now, since colour is so important, we can't ignore the colour wheel. As you can see from our little graphic, we have three primary colours: blue, red and yellow. The colour that is directly opposite one of the primary colours is called a complementary colour. As you can see from here, our complementary colour for orange is blue. So Owen is busy putting some blue beside the orange so that we can see the two colours interact with each other. Now we have identified something that could be developed as a drawing or a painting. So I've asked the boys to go and make two drawings, one each, and they have to include orange and blue.
So, there's a donkey falling from the sky and he got a parachute and he has a purple nose. There is a rabbit and he is black and orange and he got a carrot and there's also fireworks. And then he met the spud, and the spud's jumping up in the puddles. Well, so I draw the donkey, and then I gave him little arms. And this is Mount Everest. He's almost bigger than it. And these are the clouds, and this is the sun. And then he's saying Eeyore, and his name's Patch because he is a white patch.
So from that example, you can see that it doesn't all have to be written. We can develop areas into artworks themselves once we've identified what we find interesting. David and Owen noticed that as well as the object being spherical, the object also had a strange surface to it. It was rather bumpy. This was a fun observation that the boys made. But we wanted to develop this a little bit further. And this brings us to a really important point. Mind maps are very personal. You can bring all kinds of stories, experiences, and you can bring them into your mind map. And very recently, the boys were eagerly following the SpaceX mission to fly to the International Space Station. So that was fresh in their minds. And when we talked about things that were bumpy and that were spherical, the boys came up with the idea of it looking like the moon. This is a perfect example of why a mind map is so important. It helps us to use lateral thinking, which some people might call thinking outside of the box. It's a really important skill to have. It's a skill that you can bring through your school life, you can bring into your adult life when you begin a job. That job could be anything. Being able to think outside of the box helps you to be creative, to find creative solutions to problems. A shopping list, for example, is linear. Our mind map is non-linear and is closer to how our minds work. Now, let's get back to this investigation of the moon. For this part, we're going to have a little bit of fun.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Ooh, we're in outer space.
Now that we've landed back on Earth, we can bring our new discoveries to you. we learned that the moon affects the Earth's tides. So that will be our sea tides. The sea comes in and the sea goes out. And if anybody has ever walked the beach, you will often find a variety of objects that have been washed up on the shore. Taking inspiration from our sea tides, we began to discuss what type of objects we might find. Taking this list as an opportunity to make some drawings rather than just putting words down, what we did was we discussed what we would find on the beach and then we made small drawings. We talked about finding stones, starfish, pieces of fishermen's nets, crabs, driftwood, and lastly, seaweed. This quickly became another area of interest. The boys were extremely excited about it. So what we decided to do was we talked about what would we do if we actually went to the beach. What ideas could we come up with? Would we make drawings, or would we begin to link another two aspects of our mind map together and actually begin to develop some interesting structures? And that's exactly what we did.
I built a big castle and the hole's the dungeon, and a leprechaun and a mushroom live in the castle, and then they trap lots of olives because they're their enemies. Well, I built like a path going out from a little wooden house I built, and then I put some grass seed there, and then I put sand over it and watered it.
So let's recap on what we did. The little journey that we took began with an orange, and we expanded that out into multiple areas. One of those areas was colour. Thinking outside of the box, we also drew comparisons between the orange and the moon. From our research, we discovered that the gravity from the moon affects the Earth's tides. And after discussing that, we talked about lots of different things that were washed up on the beach. We linked that back in with the story that we learned about the segments of the orange and how the segments of the orange influenced the architect when he was designing the Sydney Opera House. All of these investigations have led us to make drawings and cool little structures down on the beach, and it all stemmed from the orange.
Bye. 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 Bye.